Hello everyone, I might as well get started on time. I would just like everybody to admire, before we start, my beautiful PowerPoint presentation. And I will say that a significant amount of the time that I spent preparing for this talk, I actually spent writing the PowerPoint presentation because it is surprisingly difficult to actually get that live tile effect on it. So I thought I'd come in a little bit early and give people the opportunity to admire it properly. So first of all, a little bit of an introduction. I'm Marion Mccune. I'm going to age myself here. This is the first time I've been back in Cambridge for like 20 years, and 20 years ago was when I was actually at university here. I've been working with Microsoft products back since DOS 3, which some of you may remember. One of my very first jobs that I actually had when I worked for an engineering company was to actually go around with a floppy disk that had the edit program copied off a DOS 5 machine to copy it onto all the DOS 3 machines because they didn't have it, so that's how far back I go. I'm director of my own security testing company, and you'll see at the top, that's my logo. I've been doing that for 3 years. Before that, I was actually the head of exchange for a big corporate. The less said about that, the better. And the things that I tend to do for a living are web applications, what people will call Microsoft stuff. I'm also very interested in mobile. I had the opportunity to attend the mobile training on Android and iOS earlier this week, and I've tried to it's actually given me some really good insights into how the type of applications that I'm going to talk about today actually not only fit into the traditional Windows world, but also a kind of what I can almost describe as Microsoft's take on slotting in a mobile ecosystem into their desktop infrastructure. And I think that's particularly interesting with what I'll call universal apps, which have just been announced that I'll come to next. Here's my rig at home. I couldn't resist it. I like Surfaces. This is a Surface. Let's hope it all doesn't go wrong this time. There's an Xbox One in there somewhere as well. And I get to live here, which is Loch Head out in scenic Argyll, and I get to test websites for a living, so I consider myself to be quite happy in that respect. So what we're going to talk about today, this is just an introduction to Windows Store apps from the point of view of the kind of testing that we would be asked to do here in the UK. So I'm a tester rather than a developer. And you'll see my attempts at developing a Windows Store app later. It's not very good as yet. But what I'd like to make clear from the start is this isn't a kind of like a red teaming approach to this. This also is not, you know, I've got 6 months to study and analyze one of these apps and really analyze them from a Windows perspective and perhaps start attacking the Windows kernel and hoping that Microsoft will give me £250,000 to do it. This is literally, you know, I've been told by my testing company, you've got one of these things to do and you've got 4 to 5 days to do it. So, you know, you better just get on with it. And often people, I found this myself because I test a lot of things that I don't know anything about. So this will give you an opportunity to just see whether things are actually located. As a matter of interest, how many people here are actually testers? Most people. Developers? I shudder to ask this here. Anyone here developed Windows 8 apps? Oh, good. Oh, good. Good. Right, so first of all, I'm going to give you some background. Then I'm going to introduce the Windows Store and show you some apps. Then I'm going to talk about the security architecture of them. I'll talk about the Windows runtime, which is what these things are developed to. I'll talk about the sort of development environments that you might expect to see. I'll talk about store requirements and certification. And then finally, on this section, I'll talk about the Microsoft testing process. And then I'll jump on and actually start talking about how you would test them. So I'll try and go over this part quite quickly. So firstly, just a little bit of background to this. How many people use Windows 8 at home or in anger? Or a disappointingly small proportion, never mind. So back in the day, when Windows 8 was first being developed, all the talk at Microsoft was around Metro apps. And this is the story behind the title for this talk, which is Metro Down the Tube. It's also my T-shirt. Because the way that Microsoft was supposed to develop this design language is all supposed to have been based around the metro signs in Seattle, which is obviously right next to Redmond. And the kind of cut-down, sparse design that it's got was supposed to reflect these designs. It was actually quite interesting because someone showed me a screenshot this morning of some of the work that Google have been doing and some of the stuff that's come out of their conference this week. And I believe somebody made the comment that I think Microsoft must be doing something right because everything on the web all of a sudden seems to have this flattened kind of metro look. So they are now calling it the modern design. And the apps actually sort of, you know, based on it are now called Windows Store apps. And I think that the reason, though Microsoft had never officially admitted it as far as I know, was that sometime very, very late in the process, they actually discovered that they were infringing somebody else's trademark by doing it. And it was also somebody else's trademark that they did a lot of business with. So they couldn't just say, sort of brush it under the carpet. They had to go ahead with it. So now it's actually quite funny. I don't know whether people ever watch any podcasts that have been done by Microsoft, but you'll find people quite a lot. They start to say Metro, and then they stop and have to go back and start saying Windows Store apps, which is rather like listening to people talking about Bing. So you see the tube is closed. That was the other part of the talk. So the Windows Store, back in 2012 when these things were being issued, Google and Apple already had a store. So the huge temptation for Microsoft must have been to say, right, we need a piece of the action like this. We need to get a whole lot of developers 30% as well. I actually think, maybe I'm being a little bit charitable here, but I actually think that there was a deeper purpose to it than that, because one of the things that sort of, that you'll notice, I mean, the internet has become really a bit of a sewer, and there you've got sort of, sort of an attempt to look for something that I deliberately knew would pull up a whole lot of nasty links. But really, it has got quite bad, and it's particularly bad if you go and search for Windows binaries out there. I'm not being sexist or ageist here, but I would say that I bought my mother a Surface RT because I wasn't really happy with the fact that she was going out there with a full-on Windows laptop and, like looking for binaries. I was worried about she would find them. Any kind of search that you look for now on the internet that basically says free software for Windows, exe files, it's just an absolute recipe for getting malware. And I believe that the search Emma Watson was supposed to get the most likely to get you malware, but then I believe it was changed to Lily Collins. So you can go figure. But I imagine that if you actually went to a lot of those links that are on that page and the following pages, you're going to get yourself a nasty piece of malware. So basically, Microsoft introduced the App Store, and it's very similar to Apple Store or to the Google Play Store in the sense that it's supposed to be a secure marketplace where you can either acquire free apps or you can pay for apps, but what you'll not acquire yourself is anything nasty to take home with it. So the apps obviously range in quality and quantity. There's been a horrible rush to the bottom on these app stores. I really honestly blame tech journalists for it. To my mind, it is better to have 50,000 quality apps than it is to have a million, really crap fart apps. And the trouble, certainly with the Windows Store, I'm not look at the other two all that very much, but at one point they were like offering free Xboxes and things to people that develop. Bad plan. Because what people have done is they've, sat down, and it's quite obvious, I'll develop myself a free Xbox this afternoon, and there's a load of rubbish in there. And I don't think that the situation on the Apple and Google side is any better. So you can see there are games and things. There are also utility programs in the store, all kinds of different things, file managers and DVD players and so on. You need to be very careful with them from a tester's point of view. I'll come back to why in a minute, but I'm not expecting to see a proper Nmap clone in the store anytime soon for reasons that I'll go into. And if you do see one that you think might be useful for that kind of thing, I wouldn't, because you'll understand why once you understand the limitations of these things. So first of all, the security architecture of these things, they're very different to an ordinary Windows 32, a Win32 application, because for a start off, they run in a sandbox. And the best analogy that I've got for this, apart from saying that anybody who's familiar with mobile would be also familiar with this, is that I've seen it compared to the difference between guests in your house and guests in a hotel. So if you've got a guest in your house, they can come into your house and they're maybe just invited to the bedroom. But while you're out, there's nothing to stop them going and having a riffling around and, look in your bottom drawer, go and empty out your drinks cabinet, pull the posters off the walls, go and have a pee behind the bed. And when they've gone, there's no really good way of seeing what it is that they've done or getting rid of them again afterwards because they've just had the whole run of the building. Whereas as against that, in a hotel, what you will actually have is they're restricted to one room, and there's a process for cleaning that room out once they've gone. So the chamber person can come into the room, clean it all out, everything's gone, you're back to where you started. So that's the concept of a sandbox. And in the context of Windows Store apps, this is called the app container, and we'll see later on some apps running in an app container. And this ties in with another Windows concept, which is relatively new and hasn't got a huge amount of publicity, or not as much publicity as I would have thought it would have had, which is integrity levels. And basically, integrity levels, very quickly, if you are running as an ordinary user in Windows, you have a medium level of integrity. And the idea of the thing is that you cannot disrupt other processes which have a higher integrity level than yours. So if I'm running as a medium level process, an ordinary process, I can't disrupt or touch something that's owned by an administrator process that runs at high integrity. So these store apps will run at a very low integrity level, which is the kind of thing that you see if you ever run Internet Explorer in enhanced protected mode. You would exactly see it, and you'll see the same thing if you run Word. I don't know if anyone's ever opened a Word document, and it comes up with a bar along the top saying, you're opening this from an untrusted source. Well, if you actually, while you've got Word in that kind of mode, if you actually go into something like Process Monitor from sysinternals, and you actually add the column for integrity level, which we'll see in a minute, and you'll actually see that at that point, Word is running as a low integrity process on machines that can't do anything outside its little sandbox. As soon as you click on Word and you say, right, okay, I want to trust this thing, I want to, I want my macro virus or whatever, I'll click on Enable, and you actually see it, and it will come up to whatever integrity process level Word normally runs at. So here we see the architecture of these things. So the application, while it's running in its sandbox, it's only really got access to two areas. One is the area where it's installed in, and the other one is it's got a special area which is underneath your actual username. It's got two directories, we'll see in a moment, and it can write to those, and it talks to system APIs only through a brokered process, and then only in a way that's actually declared in its manifest. And the way that this works is that it must sound as though these things are really, really, really limited, because I'm saying they can only do very limited things. And with Windows 8, we've moved to having like nice devices, I think anyway, like the Surface, which have got a lot of cool features. So they've got microphones and webcams and all these things. And by default, these apps can't talk to any of these things, so you'd think they're a bit crap, really. But no, because what they have is capabilities, and capabilities have to be declared in a manifest when you're developing them. And capabilities are things like the ability to talk to the internet, the ability to use the webcam, the ability, for example, to use your contact details, your location, proximity sensors, all these things. And not only are those capabilities have to be declared by the developer, but they are also listed in the store before you actually install them. So if you're a canny kind of user, when you go into the store, you will see that there'll be a list next to each app saying what capabilities it's actually requesting. And then when you actually use the app for the first time, it'll prompt you again. So it's no good to say, right, I've installed it and I've forgotten about it. Then when it comes up later on, you actually run it for the first time, and it wants to use the webcam for the first time, it will actually flash a big purple box, which people may have seen onto the screen. And at that point, it'll say, can I use the webcam? And so it's like a kind of belt and braces approach to it. There's also the concept called a contract. And a contract, I don't know whether you've seen it, when you go use the share charm down the right-hand side of the screen, you'll notice that underneath sharing, there'll be a list of applications. And those are basically applications that have declared a contract. So they've said, for example, me, I can handle JPEGs. So then when you actually open a JPEG, or go to open a JPEG, you will see down the right-hand side a list of all the applications that have made a contract or attempted to make a contract to handle JPEGs. So how are these things, what runtime do they use? Well, it's not like this. I couldn't resist getting another picture of a Surface, and that's a Surface RT. Microsoft caused a huge amount of confusion over the Surface RT by calling it a Surface RT. So the name of the device was effectively the name of the runtime, which is WinRT. And what WinRT is basically is a platform where you have to develop to the Windows runtime. And the main difference, I suppose, between the runtime and other application frameworks is that it is very cut back, so you can only use a subset of APIs. And the most obvious restriction in that respect is where a traditional Windows 32 or a Win32 app could talk to, for example, straight to a database, it open up a socket and talk to it. In WinRT, everything goes over HTTP requests. So one of the things that you'll see later on is that these apps written to this framework have got a lot more reliance on web services and that kind of inter-process communication than a conventional Windows app will have, because they can't have the kind of raw access. And this is why I say that, here we can have a more interesting picture for people to look at. This is the kind of general architecture of the thing. So this is not a replacement for Win32. I don't think Microsoft themselves would even claim. I mean, in fact, I think they said the other day that there will never be Visual Studio that is written as a Meta app. So you're never going to see something where something of that level of complexity is actually developed in this kind of Meta style. The other thing about WinRT is that it's deliberately designed to be asynchronous. So an awful lot of the JavaScript calls that you'll see, they assume that things aren't going to be very instantaneous. So they'll go in and work on things in the background. Very early on, I actually had a troll through the store. I thought to myself, I'll see what kind of thing that I would be interested in can you develop using this runtime? And I came across an app, which I won't actually mention the name of it, but it looks as though it was a kind of Nmap clone. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. And I did some kind of Nmap type functionality with it, and it appeared to go out and do it, and it appeared to return results. And I thought, oh, this is quite good. And I wonder how on earth it's doing it, because the point of this is you can't mess with it on a protocol level. What I actually discovered that it did was it actually went out and it went to the web service, and the web service went to another server that was out there on the internet, and that was essentially running Nmap. Now, to any tester that has, you'll probably notice what the obvious problem with that is the sense that it wasn't coming from your IP address anymore. It was coming from somebody else's IP address out on the internet. So if you ever want to use any of this kind of app for testing, you need to be sure of what it's doing. Here you can see actually on the picture, Microsoft are leading into this idea of universal apps. So this was actually something that was launched very, very recently in Build. The idea that you can develop once using Visual Studio you can develop on the Windows platform, and it will develop for Windows Phone as well. And I think that's just the beginning. I'll be somewhat surprised if next year they don't bring the Xbox into the fold, and you actually discover that with Windows 9 you can develop one application that will run on everything from a 4-inch screen on a phone right up to a 50-inch screen on a television set. And to me, that's quite a cool, interesting concept. Development environments. These are the different things that you can develop with. So effectively, there's 3 sorts of app, of which one of them you won't see all that very often. And these are the percentages that you'll see of them at the store as of about 3 months ago, which is where I got these statistics from. This is quite interesting to see, or quite interesting to me, because I think that Microsoft were trying very hard to push the idea that all these things were going to be developed in JavaScript and HTML. They've produced an interesting series of apps themselves, which are quite good to the Bing apps, if you want to look at how these apps hang together. And I think they had this idea that JavaScript was going to be the big, enormous platform for them. But I think that the developer base has wanted to stick with obviously the deeply traditional C# developers. So you see a lot of apps there out in the store when you go and look at them, and you think to yourself, God, that would have been crying out to be a JavaScript app, but no, it's written in C#. So people like what they know. It never ceases to amaze me, the number of things that people think will be a good idea to push into JavaScript. I mean, I know there's a book called JavaScript, The Good Bits, and it's like that thick, and then there could be JavaScript, The Bad Bits, which is that thick. Yeah. And at this point, when you actually get to the point of starting to develop, you'll notice that when you fire up Visual Studio and you choose a template for a store app, at that point, it will ask you, do you want a license to develop? Because you need a license to develop from this point of view. And literally at this point, all you need to do is click OK, and it will go out and do it, and it will verify that you have a Microsoft account at this point. But to be honest, the Microsoft account could be testuser.idon'texist@outlook.com. You can just make up an account now. So at this point, the evil empire don't need to know where you live, but they will want to know where you live at the point where you actually submit an app to the actual store. And what your license to develop will at this point give you is it will give you the ability effectively to sideload apps onto your machine and to run them onto your machine. Because normally the only avenue for you can't get one of these, develop it, and then give it out to 16 of your friends. you can package it up and give it to other developers, but they also need development licenses on each one of the machines that they're going to use for it. So you can exchange it to a limited extent for the purpose of testing, but you can't actually sort of just hand it around and bypass the store altogether in that respect. Here you can see Blend for Visual Studio. Two very useful tools to get before you start testing any one of these. One of them will be Visual Studio Express, which is free, and the Windows 8 version. And the other thing which comes with it is Blend, which is also free, and actually, completely coincidentally, is also a super cool tool if you're not a really great HTML developer and you want to draft up cool-looking websites for doing phishing attacks and things like that. It's quite cool. So the store requirements and certification. Once you've actually got the app, or once the developer has actually created the app, he will actually package it up. And while he packages it up, he will actually create the app manifest, which lives in the top-level directory. And that's the thing that I was talking about earlier, which contains the list of capabilities and requirements for the app. And there are lots of requirements at that point. If you want to read up on it, there's a Microsoft documentation as long as you're on. I don't think they keep to the requirements all that very well. You keep seeing things about, oh, the developer has said that this application meets with accessibility requirements that can be used by everyone. No. Yeah, so they're not. I think a lot of the requirements there are largely brushed under the carpet, and also content, because you're not supposed to. You're not allowed to have kind of 18 rated content in these things, apart from for certain games. And then you give it a whack, as I call it. This is the Windows certification kit. So effectively, this is something that when you think that you've got it ready, you run it through a pretend deployment process on your own machine, and you'll see whether it actually passes. If it does pass the whack, it can still fail the store for various other reasons, but they say that they will tell you why it has actually failed if it passes whack but fails the store. The other day there was a lot of chat around what Google and Apple actually test for in the stores. I think Microsoft, in a way, are stricter than either of the other two, but in a number of ways are less strict than Apple, but more strict than Google, so they're somewhere in between the two. So most of the stuff that they'll actually do are what I describe as like old-style security tests. So, for example, they'll test all these things with their bin scope analyzer, and these are mainly headers that, if you've developed in Visual Studio, will automatically be there, which is why later on that they actually tell you to develop in Visual Studio. So things like SLR and things like DET, and they'll make sure that all these things are turned on. And they'll make sure that you haven't sort of set things that you haven't ruined the registry, and that you haven't set your executables up in the wrong way and all that stuff. And last but not least, very importantly, they'll give it a check to make sure that it is not malware. And they'll also give it what they describe as other testing as well. So when you actually submit it, you have to give them notes to testers, so that they will actually know what the application does. And I believe that if you have certain categories of application, that they'll actually give them like increased scrutiny. So if you say I'm a banking app, or I'm a secure password app, they'll look at it more. I've looked at some secure password apps, and I didn't really see a great deal of sign that they've been hugely greatly tested. So all this is really good stuff. And up until now, I'm actually feeling like a warm, fluffy feeling about these compared to traditional Windows apps, where basically you just go and you get them and you grab them. But there's always a but. This is a really good presentation. There's not much stuff on the internet about Windows Store apps, but this is one. This was done by some guys at Trend, and it was done right back in the day when Windows 8 was in preview. And what they actually did was they went and gave the store apps a good going over, and they came up with a few things. Basically, the conclusion that they came from was that from the point of view of binary applications, these things are actually quite secure, because when you're actually attacking them, you're attacking the sandbox, you're actually attacking Windows itself, you're attacking either the kernel or you're attacking COM when you try to break out. And that's actually quite difficult, because Windows has obviously been a piece of software that's had its fair share of attacks over the years, and it's pretty. I don't think that anybody who's doing a 4-day test on an app is going to be able to get through that kind of security. Defeat malware. But what you have to ask yourself is, what actually are we looking for here? Are we looking at just protecting the operating system? Or are we looking at protecting the back end of the application from a malicious user? Or are we looking at protecting user A, who is an innocent user of an application, from user B, who might not be so innocent? So hold that in your mind, and I'll come back to that in a moment. So quickly, security testing these things, where are they? The way that we were, testing approaches, software setup, JavaScript, decompilation, web services, and some lessons from another country. I'm going to have to be quick here, aren't I? So first of all, where are they? C, program files, Windows apps. You won't see it there by default. First of all, you have to put, show hidden files and folders on, and then you have to go to the security tab and take ownership of the files. And then you have to take control when prompted. And at this point, you could almost think that Microsoft didn't want you seeing this stuff. But when you've been through all those, and you have to be logged in as an administrative user to do this. And when you've done it, you'll see these, and these are the different package names. And underneath each one of these is a series of directories. And from the series of directories and the nature of the files that are in them, you can very easily see what type of app they are. In other words, whether they're a .NET app or whether they are written in JavaScript. I was going to write a little utility to do it. Most JavaScript apps actually have got a directory underneath there called JS. At this point, danger, Will Robinson, danger. The nature of these things is, if you're going to test them, don't test them under your own user ID, particularly if you like your Microsoft account and your profile. I started testing, and one of the things I messed around with was the Bing app, and I was trying to change the bypass signing on it. And not only did I break the apps on the machine I was on, but by the nature of the thing, they synchronize back to your profile in Microsoft Cloud. And then you can actually, if you log on to a different machine, the problem goes around with you and follows you. So you can actually, you log in and your app works for another 10 minutes, and all of a sudden it stops working the same way. And I actually locked myself out of these things for quite a long time. So just make a pretend account, as I said earlier. The way that we were, if you'd gone to try to test these things over a year ago, you could have done some really cool shit very easily. So you could, for example, you could have taken an app that was like proprietary and secret, and you could have gone in there, and if you knew what you were doing, you could hack around with it, and you could turn it into My Evil Hacker app just by going in there and changing the JavaScript and HTML. And then, if you wanted, you could have turned it into a nice open source app that was free and healthy and everything. Unfortunately, they've closed all these, or most of these holes off over the course of the last year. So it's now, these apps have got Windows resource protection on them, and they're really difficult to actually modify, or they're very difficult to get them to modify through Windows. So now what you can actually do, the obvious way to do this is to actually, you can't directly go in there and change that directory and change the code in it because it won't let you. But you can go and you can mount that file system in Linux, and you can go and you can change it. And you can change all the pictures in the app to pictures of kittens or do whatever you like. But unfortunately, when you go back into Windows and you start the thing back up, it checks the signature as soon as the app starts to run. And if it was even one byte of that's changed, just won't run at all. There is a mechanism for developers, for paid apps, to actually verify back to the store to make sure that they're real. And that got hacked at the end of 2012, but it's been fixed now. So now the security of these things very much is down to sort of the individual app. So in other words, it comes down to testing the individual app and not the security of where it's sitting within Windows. Testing approaches. I wouldn't be bothering with, this is how I'd go about it. I wouldn't be bothering with these things with trying in a short period of time to attack the sandbox. You can treat them as web applications. You can look for local data on them, and as I said, there's two places that gets created. You can do decompilation and code review, and that's made nice by the fact that you can actually look at the code for them. And as I said earlier on, these things have an unusually large reliance on web services, so you can actually look at attacking that. Software setup goes without saying you need a copy of Windows 8 or Windows 8.1 to do this. They won't run in Windows 7. I don't think there's any way of doing it. Slightly surprised me. They will run on the server operating system, but you have to have the desktop experience pack actually installed on that. Here you can see sort of the Fiddler web debugger and proxy. I am normally a burp user, like most professional testers, but I think that these work better with Fiddler for two reasons. You'll notice that there's a Windows 8 config button up there on the top left. That's really important. By default, and as a security measure, these apps won't talk to the local loopback address. Obviously, you need them to do that, unless you've got a funny setup with if you're going to run your proxy on the same machine, you need to have them do that. And if you click on that button, then it will actually give you a choice of which ones do you want to enable or disable. You can do it yourself with PowerScript or any other scripting languages, but that makes it nice and easy for you. This is also free, so you don't run it. Well, obviously, you get free versions of both as well. And then decompilation tools for .NET, or disassembly tools for .NET. I personally use .NET Reflector. I find it very stable and very good, and it costs a little bit of money. There's also .peak, which is open source and free, but keeps crashing my machine, or did back then. And here you've got sort of, so this is the dialogue that I was talking about. This is how you actually disable the app container loopback exemption, which you need to do before you start. So on these JavaScripts and HTML apps, these are really web applications, and you can on the whole treat them as such. They have a concept called local context versus web context, but I never understood too much until I came to compare them to the way that Android works. And this basically means that local context is any web page that is actually declared and loaded up in your app manifest. So that's local. And remote context is, web context is anything apart from that. So the difference between the two is that anything that runs in local context can actually effectively access the machine. So it can access the Windows runtime on the machine, the registry, the devices, everything. But as a security measure, when you do that, anything that can damage the DOM is automatically filtered out, so you can't effectively run remote scripts on it, so it just blocks them. And whereas web context is different to that, so you load up other web pages in the web context, and they can run scripts and things, but what they can't do is access the Windows runtime. And all these apps actually run as a headless version of IE, and when you look at them, you can see them in Task Explorer as WWA host, which I, for reasons that are just mine, called the WAR host. It's quite interesting because it's nice when you're testing them, because you only need to worry about this one browser. You don't have to worry about, right, okay, God, I went and tested it in Chrome, and I got this nice cross-site, I can't get cross-site scripting on it in Chrome, and say, but God, I didn't try it in Firefox, and I didn't try it in IE, and I didn't try it in 14 other browsers that I've got in different versions. Well, these things only run in IE, so you don't have any choice in the matter. And these apps, they suffer, I would say, once you actually get into testing them, from the typical problems that apps with a good framework suffer from. So in other words, they don't tend to have like awful problems, like for example with cross-site scripting, like really overt problems with it. But what they actually do suffer from is all the things that or can suffer from, other things that frameworks don't help you about, so that they're not immune from, for example, from authorization flaws. The other thing that so it's possible to get cross-site scripting with them, but the developer actually has to work at it a little bit. It doesn't just sort of, oh, I'll do nothing, and I'll have the cross-site scripting problem. On the whole, if you do nothing, you won't have it. One thing I had to mention was SSL, because I noticed that a lot of the Android and iOS people were talking about this. By default with these things, if you use SSL, you must be a valid certificate at the other end, because the default behavior for them is that if the certificate, if they hit a certificate and it's not good, like it's expired or it's the wrong name or it's self-signed, it will just bomb out and it will just close the app, because that's what these apps do. So there was a lot of complaints about this, and because a lot of companies and apps, they like to use these self-signed certificates. So now you can use a self-signed certificate, but if you do, you have to bag it up in your manifest so that the app actually knows about it. And here we can see a picture of Task Manager, and we can see the WAR host, and these are all different apps that are running. And like good citizens, when they're not running, they after 5 seconds they'll suspend themselves. When you go into desktop mode and you've left 14 store apps open on your machine, you'll see them all sitting there and suspended. That's actually one of the things that gets checked for. If they don't suspend nicely, then they don't pass their certification. And here you can actually see that what I was referring to earlier, which is that the WAR host runs as a low integrity process. So while these things are running as low integrity processes, they can't easily break out their sandbox. Decompilation code review. .NET apps, as everyone knows, these can be trivially decompiled. You can obfuscate them. And at this point, once you actually get them decompiled, you just right-click on them. in within Windows Explorer, and you can say to it, right-click and open the executable or open the DLL in .NET Reflector. And once you've got it open, then a lot is going to depend on your ability to read the language. So typically, web testers can read JavaScript quite well. Typically, also, they may or may not be able to read things like C#. So some of the things that you're actually after, even if you can't actually read the language, you can look in there, and you can look for things like credentials and keys that maybe you could attack web services with later on. You can check things like developer mode. You know, have they got developer mode or have they got test mode on? I don't really have time to go into this in great detail. One of the things you used to be able to do, of course, was you would be able to modify the app. So if it had like admin mode equals false, you could change it to admin mode equals true and see what happened. And you can't directly do that anymore. What you can do if you feel fancy about it, I'll write a blog post on how to do this, is you can actually copy all the HTML and JavaScript out of one project in Visual Studio and compile it as a new project with the same name, and then run it on your machine, and then actually change it that way. And you can, that's quite a good way when you're actually testing these things. If you've not been given the source code, if effectively all you've been given is like a kind of like a blank canvas to it, that's one of the ways that I find of getting around it. And SSL, you should be looking for this last statement here, because that's the statement that actually forces SSL, in the use of SSL in this kind of app. So if it's not there, that means it can talk in clear text. Bad coding practice, I won't go into these. Eval, exec, I like that one. MS exec, unsafe local function. So actually, if you're going to write an unsafe function, it makes you realize that you're writing it while you're writing it. One of the things you can do is grep for unsafe. Untrusted dynamic content, and this is just the normal stuff. Local data I mentioned. Apps, as well as the package directory that they're installed into, they can write to anything under the package name. So these are good places to actually go and look. And there are two directories under there of interest. One is local state, and that's what happens when you, if you like, for example, I'm working on a tablet and then my boss comes past and I'm playing Marion or something, I'll cut the rope, and I close the tablet, then the state is saved into local state. Remote state is because if I've got, these things are supposed to roam, so I've got two tablets and my boss gets one and I close it, and I want to be able to open it up onto another and instantly restore it, so that puts it into remote state. An interesting piece of research would be, I don't think Microsoft have ever stated exactly where this remote state goes. It's somewhere on their cloud. Web services. The attitude of most developers to web services is the fact that if users don't see them, they're not there, and they don't really need to worry about the security of them. And you do, as I'm sure all testers know. So here's a web service that I tested earlier, and I'm sure everyone could tell that it had SQL injection in it. As I said earlier, these things, because they're very limited in the way that they can make RPC calls, and they're effectively limited to HTTP, they make a greater than normal use of this kind of thing. So it's always nice to try to find the back end and have a look at the little APIs. So also some lessons from another country. Anyone who's familiar with mobile will have seen that these things are actually really very, very, very similar to mobile apps. This brings me very nicely to the OWASP Mobile Top 10, because this is obviously very, very, very relevant. And to turn it on its head slightly, these are the recommendations that Microsoft give for developers. So as testers, what we should actually be doing here is we should be making sure that the developer has actually done this, or in other words, looking to see whether he hasn't. So things like minimizing the app capabilities. Don't trust remote data. That's obviously obvious. Authentication. That's one that by default these things will say they'll use the Windows credential locker or a Microsoft account to actually authenticate with, but you can use all kinds of other things. You can use OAuth. You can write your own authentication schema if you want to. So that's a really good thing to look into. And possibly one of the most important things, don't play around with the mechanisms by which the WinRT is segregated from the internet. Otherwise, you really will make yourself problems. Or turning it around, sorry, I'm talking to developers, I'm not talking to developers, I'm talking to testers. You need to look to make sure that the developer has not screwed around with this, because that is somewhere that you really will end up with problems. So the obligatory, just before I finish, OWASP project for this, I've written, or I'm starting to write a little training application to assist developers and testers with this. And there's a web goat, and there's Rails goat, and there's Droid goat, and I discovered this week that there's iGoat as well. So I thought we'd had more than enough goats around, so I thought we'd have a store sheep instead. This is store sheep, and store sheep is called a friend for you. You is a sort of joke. And store sheep is going to be a dating agency for sheep. So basically what you can do is you fill in your own profile, and then you fill in the profile of your sheep, and then you can, later on in the whole process, you will get the opportunity to have your sheep meet up in the cloud with other sheep and compare their experiences. And along the way, you will find some hideous security vulnerabilities. So I'm kind of working on that at the moment. It's just an alpha at the moment, so you won't see anything very interesting on it. Those two buttons are just me mucking around with IndexedDB. So I was going to, if there were any Windows 8 developers in the audience, I was going to say that any assistance on this would be greatly welcome, because I'm not a developer. I'm just learning on all this stuff. But I hope that we'll actually work on this and actually be able to get a good project. In conclusion, are these things actually sort of secure? I said I'd return to this subject. Well, in a way, yes. Yeah, I'd say they are secure. They're a huge improvement on traditional Windows binaries for all the reasons that I've gone into. And frankly, if you get ordinary non-technical users and you say to them, where would I rather that they were going to get the software? Would I rather they were going out onto the internet and acquiring malware and all those things, or going to the Windows Store and getting these things which, although some of the apps may not be, absolutely fantastic, they're at least you're not going to get a virus from them, or at least there've not been any recorded instance of it so far. And Microsoft are really trying hard to make them, secure in that respect. But my husband says that there's no such thing as he's also my business partner, which is why I mentioned it. Because in a way, these things are, Microsoft cannot make these things secure in the way that maybe a lot of users presume that they are, because for the majority of these apps, or the ones worth their salt, they've got to be web applications. They're going out there and they're talking to the servers at the back end. And if you've got a web service that is the majority functionality of some of these apps, it doesn't make any difference that if it's nice and secure on the client, if it's hideously secure on the back end. In other words, if it's got SQL injections in its API, you can't expect Microsoft to go out there and be testing, your web server. You wouldn't want them to, and they couldn't, because so you might have other things that are pointed against that. So developers and testers need to make absolutely sure that they know when they're going into testing these things what the limitations of the security model provided by Microsoft are, and where they actually need to break out of that and actually start testing themselves. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave this with a great big enormous resounding maybe. And unlike most things in security, I suppose whether they're secure or not really depends on your terms of reference and your definition of security. Questions? Questions? No questions?
Sorry.
Oh, go for it. Sorry, I didn't catch the very first line.
Is the risk higher in access? The risk the same as an OWASP, or is it higher?
Well, I would say you're less likely to get it, because you have to actually quite work as a developer to get it, because it's like ASP.NET. It's got, like, I suppose, the equivalent of like an enhanced version of request validation. Plus, because it runs in a new, secure in as much as it stands, version of IE. You're not having to cope with people who go in there and do it with IE8 or IE6 or something like that. But I don't think that if you actually deliberately go and break that model, yes, you can get cross-site scripting with it, but I'd say you're probably less likely to get it than you would with a conventional app, if that makes any sense. Oh, go for it.
Is the security architecture the same for a mobile application as it is for a tablet or Windows 8 application?
Well, the phone is slightly different at the moment, and this is really about on a this would be for everything from like an 8 or 10-inch tablet right up to any Windows PC that you've got, and are also really the same on an RT or Windows RT device as it would be on a full-on Windows Pro 8 device. The phone is slightly different at the moment, but it's not. When you build one of these new universal apps with it, which I just need to start looking into, it will be exactly the same on the phone, well, within the limitations of the fact the phones are smaller, as it would be on the full-size app. So at the moment, very slightly different. In the future, they won't be any different. They'll just have the same security model.
Do you have any recommendations for testing like specific mobile phone applications? The problem that we encounter usually is that you cannot get root access or like administrative access to a phone so that you can actually play around with the application. Do you know anything that you can do to bypass the situation?
It's funny, I was talking to somebody about that the other day. It's exactly the same situation, really, as you get with an iPhone, where you don't have, if all you've got right is a really new version of the iPhone and it you haven't got a jailbreak for it, then really you're stuck with doing things like, for example, you can look at the bits and pieces that it actually does expose on the phone, and you can test it as a web app if it's got a back end to it. And you can attach Visual Studio to it, and you can look at things like the processes, but what you can't do is just go in there and actually have a play about, and that's both a limitation and a strength. It's good from the point of view of the fact, well, there's no jailbreak, so you don't have to worry about, what if people use a jailbroken device, but on the other hand, it's bad from the point of view of, you can't, it's difficult to then say to the customer, it's secure, and then there's a jailbreak 2 weeks later, and then so that is actually a problem in that respect from that point of view. Nope, okay, thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for listening.